to Uncle Torvald's story time. These stories come from my life in the current Middle Ages as with the Society For Creative Anachronism. And these are what we in that group would often refer to as no shit, there I was stories. Things that happened to us or that we saw happen, and we would sit around and share them with each other. As a storyteller, poet, singer-songwriter, I've always felt that it was part of my job to record the history that I see around me. And these stories, while fairly well centered on me, of course, they're told about me and what I have seen, still record events within that group as well as within my own life. And I hope that you will enjoy them. This first story involves two of my oldest friends in the SCA, but I'm going to withhold their names until I reach the end, because they end up being something of the punchline to the whole story, at least especially for those of us who actually know them personally. So, let's get on with the very first story. This takes place at a Sanaguan coronet tournament where we're choosing our new prince. We hold these twice a year. And I had been in the SCA for approximately 20 years at this time, so I was a pretty experienced fighter. And after the second round, I had come through clean, won my first two fights, and I was fighting that day for the honor of Mistress Anastasia Grinstead of Ravenoak, when they called for me to prepare to go out for the third round. They of course also called out the name of my opponent. And there was something about the name that I recognized, but I couldn't quite place it. It's like I knew the name from somewhere, and I knew most of the fighters in the Principality, but for some reason the name just didn't click. And as we start heading out there, I'm watching my opponent approach, and his armor doesn't register either, which is really, actually, if you're a fighter in the SCA, very often you don't even recognize other fighters if they're not in their armor. Maybe people in other historical reenactment groups or fantasy groups will understand that often if you meet someone outside of that organization, you may not recognize them without their costuming and so on. Well, with fighters, oftentimes we only meet each other in battle. We live in very distant cities from each other, and so the only times we get together is when we're at these events, and especially if the person is on the other side, you never see them without their armor and without their helmet on. And their face is very different than what you see when you're looking into their grill. So again, as this person is coming out to face me, I'm not recognizing the armor, and the name is still nagging at me in the back of my head. But it still just hasn't clicked. So now we're facing up, the herald has introduced us, we've gone through the salutes, and they call lay on. Now, I'm wanting to get this fight over quickly. One of the things about the tournaments in the kingdom where I started was we usually had a very large number of people in them. The coronet tournaments, it was actually normal to have anywhere from 30 to 50 fighters in it. In our crown tournaments, we could get anywhere from 70 to over 100 people in them. And so the tournaments end up being as much an endurance competition as they are about skill. And so from a competition standpoint in the tournament, often I've remarked that I would rather face someone who's either much better than I am or is not as experienced as I am, because either way the fight's over quick. Against someone who's better than I am, it's going to be short and I'm going to be down. And against someone who isn't as experienced as I am, I will hopefully know something they don't and we'll get the fight over quickly. The last thing that you really want to do is to end up in a knockdown, drag-out cat fight with someone who is just your equal in skill and experience. Because at the end of this fight, because it drags out and drags out and drags out, no matter who wins, the next person, you're going to be wiped out. You're going to be really gassed and have a hard time fighting. So you really do want the fights to be short. So after having been in the SCA for 20-something years and fighting all of that time, I do have a bag of dirty tricks. They're not really dirty tricks, but we call it that. And it essentially is different types of shots or fakes that lead up to shots. And so you're trying to trick your opponent into giving you an opening. And so in my case, at this point, I've got a 20-year-old bag of dirty tricks. So as the fight starts, I reach into my bag and I only go down a couple of years to a shot that I've used fairly frequently. But you see, here was the thing. I noticed through the faceplate of my helmet that my opponent was young. Looked like he couldn't have been much more than 17, 18, 19 years old. So he hadn't been around very long. I mean, we only allowed heavy fighters to start at age 16. So there was no youth combat back then. It was all, you didn't get to fight heavy until you were 16. And so I figured he couldn't have seen very much at that point. So I reach down into my bag of dirty tricks, go back just a few years, throw a shot, he blocks it. Okay, he's seen that one. Into a fighter practice, that shot wasn't very old, fine. Fight a little longer, reach a little deeper into my bag of dirty tricks, go down maybe 10 years. At that point I figure I'm pretty safe. The guy isn't old enough to have been fighting to see that shot. Throw that shot, he blocks it. Okay, now what? Fine. Reach even further down into my dirty bag of tricks, go back 15 years, throw a shot that I have to dust off quite a bit because I haven't used it in a while, and it doesn't work. Alright, there's something going on here, I don't care what it is, I've got to finish off this fight, I'm done with this. So I reach all the way down to the bottom of my bag of dirty tricks. I pull out a shot that's got mold on it, and it's dusty and mildewed and rusted and nasty and gnarly, and I sling it out there and bam, I finally hit it. Oh boy, thank you. This fight is over. I can now go take my helmet off, get some water, get ready for the next fight. But the whole way back to the sideline, I'm shaking my head, still trying to figure out who this guy is. The name didn't click, the armor didn't click, and I'm still confused as hell as to how he knew all of these dirty tricks. I mean, even if he had been going to a practice with a lot of other experienced fighters, one of the things about these shots is that when you develop them, you use them and use them and use them and use them until everybody figures it out, and then you stop using it. And so that's why when I talk about having to dust them off and such, is that you haven't used them for so long that only the older generation of fighters remember them. The younger generation of fighters have never seen them because we older fighters have stopped using them. So again, I'm struggling to figure out who this is and how he knew so much about these really old combinations and fakes. And I happen to look over to the sideline and I notice Earl Sir Cubby de Elmhurst standing there with a grin stretching from ear to ear, and I go over to him and he goes, "So, how did you like fighting my son Kettle?" Kettle! Cubby's son! Cubby's son! You want to feel old? Wait until you go out there and have to work your ass off to take out a kid that you remember as a baby. That was one of those moments that you'll never forget. I mean, he busts up laughing. I'm standing there with my jaw on the ground, laughing my head off. So that was a pretty aha moment for me. Made me feel pretty old at the same time. Ah, the good old days.